A self-appointed neighborhood enforcer, brandishing a gun at a teenage boy right outside his home, was oblivious. The boy's father, a veteran of U.S. Special Forces, armed and watchful, saw everything. Terrence Brooks, 42, had left his fighting days behind him. 2 decades with the U.S. Army Special Forces, countless missions, a chest full of unspoken medals, and stories only his son Dorian might ever truly hear. Now he craved normalcy. A lawn to mow, a cluttered garage, and sleep undisturbed by distant gunfire or hushed radio commands. This yearning for peace led him to a modest 3-bedroom house on a quiet tree-lined street in Warner Robins, Georgia. Close enough to work and school, yet far enough for quiet. It wasn't fancy, but it had a good roof, a yard for Dorian, and neighbors who, on paper, seemed to mind their own business. Terrence, however, knew peace rarely came easy for men like him. The first few days were uneventful. Dorian, sharp at 14, helped unpack. His room still smelled of cardboard and new carpet, buzzing with excitement for a fresh start. But Terrence noticed the subtle shifts. Cars slowing, a woman crossing the street, a delivery driver's hesitation. Dorian saw it too, a silent side glance when the same beat-up red Ford, loud and smoky, crept by. "Same guy?" Dorian asked. "Don't worry about it," Terrence muttered, though his half-smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "If I start worrying, I'll let you know." But Terrence was already watching. The truck circled twice more that week, once stopping down the street. A lean, white man mid-50s with oversized sunglasses and a holstered weapon emerged. Neighbors waved. Terrence didn't. That weekend 2 more security cameras went up. Dorian, without question, handed tools and held ladders. A quiet tension settled, like dry sticks awaiting a spark. Later, brushing his teeth, Dorian asked, "Think they'll ever stop looking at us like that?" Terrence paused. "Some people need longer to adjust to difference. Doesn't mean we stop living." "You miss the base?" "I miss knowing who was watching my back." They said little more. Terrence, scrolling camera feeds, watched the street, memorizing patterns. The red truck lingered too long. The same man walked the same dog at 9:04 p.m. every night. No kids playing. No welcomes. This wasn't peace, not yet. But Terrence, disciplined by training, would not be the one to ignite the fire. He would wait. Dean Whitlock needed no badge to feel like a cop. He wore a shiny fake HOA security badge clipped next to a poorly handled pistol, fueled by pride and zero training. His role, self-appointed community defender. Dean, who'd lived on Caraway for 19 years, knew every dog license plate and how long your guests could stay. Most found him annoying. Some ignored him. A few, however, appreciated his vocal opinions. So when Terrence and Dorian moved in, something in Dean tightened. Military service, neat lawn, waves. None of it mattered. He saw 2 black faces on his street, and he wasn't subtle. Terrence had noted the red truck early, always slowing when Dorian was outside. Even without Dorian, Dean would creep by, watching windows, the mailbox. One afternoon, Dean was caught on camera inspecting their sidewalk. What's he even doing? Dorian wondered. Terrence filed a quiet report with the HOA, but the form letter confirmed Dean was not their responsibility. No one would stop him. Dean moved with an air of ownership, his loud confidence unchallenged. At the corner store, he blocked Terrence's exit. "You the new guy at 324? He asked, script-like. "That's right," Terrence replied, raising an eyebrow at Dean's question about mailbox approval. "There's a way things are done around here. We like to keep it looking a certain way," Dean chuckled, a hint of menace in his voice. "Lot of turnover lately. Not always the good kind." Terrence simply walked past, slow and silent. From that moment, Dean saw Terrence as a problem. Not for anything done, but for refusing to bow, for not playing his expected part. Dean hated being ignored. A week later, Dorian was fixing his mountain bike chain near the driveway. Dean pulled up, stared for a full minute, then rolled down his window. "You live here?" he demanded. Confused, Dorian stood up. "Yeah. Got proof?" Dean pressed. "Excuse me." Dorian blinked. "You heard me." Terrence stepped out calm. "Is there a problem here?" Dean, attempting a smile, thought better of it and drove off. "What was that?" Dorian exhaled. "Exactly what it looked like," Terrence said. "Why didn't you go off on him?" Dorian asked. "Because that's what he wants. He's counting on me losing control so he can claim he was right all along." Dorian looked down. That's messed up. Yeah, Terrence agreed. It is. Dean had made his decision. This was about control and he wouldn't stop until someone forced him to. It was a warm, clear Thursday afternoon. Dorian, home from school, tossed his backpack and grabbed his bike for his usual cul-de-sac loops. Terrence, reheating leftovers, watched the Ring camera feed. Not paranoid, just cautious habit. Dorian pedaled, rounded the corner and rode past the vacant house across the street. Dean Whitlock's truck reappeared, the same slow crawl, but this time he parked directly across from the Brooks driveway. He stepped out, no pretense, and walked straight toward Dorian. Dorian slowed, seeing him. Dean's hand rested on his hip, too close to the weapon. You don't live here, Dean said flatly, loudly. Dorian squinted. I do. No, I don't think you do, Dean countered. I've been watching. You've been wandering around other people's property. Dorian put a foot down, standing tall. I haven't stepped off the sidewalk. Dean took another step. Sidewalk's part of the community, not just yours. Inside, Terrence dropped his fork. He'd already swiped open the camera app. He saw Dean's stance, the hovering hand, Dorian's stiffening posture. Then Dean pulled the gun, angled down, a silent threat. Terrence moved, no panic, just swift efficiency. He opened the living room safe, drew his 6-hour, standard issue from active duty. He didn't run, he walked, calm, controlled. By the time he reached the front door, Dean had taken another step toward Dorian. You take one more step with that weapon pointed anywhere near my son, Terrence said, and you won't get another one. Dean spun around. Terrence stood on the porch edge, gun visible, grip firm, voice steady. Dean's mouth opened, no clever retort forming. His hand twitched on the pistol. Unclip it now, Terrence commanded. Put it down. You've got 3 seconds. Dean didn't move. Terrence took one step forward, deliberate. Dean suddenly became acutely aware of the Ring camera, the peeking neighbors, the street silence. He unclipped the gun, placed it on the sidewalk and slowly raised both hands as if remembering he wasn't invincible. Back up 5 steps. Terrence's voice remained even. Dean obeyed, 5 clumsy steps back. Sit. Dean lowered himself to the curb, attempting defiance but failing. His face was red, shirt sticking, looking small and outmatched. Terrence turned to Dorian. You good? Dorian nodded, eyes wide but steady. I'm okay. Go inside, Terrence ordered. Go. Dorian walked toward the porch, glancing back twice before disappearing, watching from behind the curtain, fists clenched. Terrence stood over Dean and calmly called 911. Reporting a man pulling a weapon on a minor, giving his name, address, and confirming everything was recorded. Dean remained silent until the police arrived 10 minutes later, then tried to flip the narrative. He was threatening me. Dean told the officers. I was defending myself. The officer looked at Terrence. Camera footage. Front angle, clear audio, Terrence replied. Want me to airdrop it? They took Dean's weapon, checked his ID. He'd been warned before about impersonating HOA authority, but no charges ever stuck, until now. Dean was handcuffed and placed firmly in the patrol car. As the cruiser rolled off, a younger officer gave Terrence a long look. You handled that differently than most would have. Terrence didn't smile. I was trained for worse than this. But what shook Terrence most wasn't Dean's gun. It was how many neighbors had watched in silence. The police cruiser hadn't cleared the street before the neighborhood group chat exploded. Terrence wasn't on it, but Tanya Ramsey, his next-door neighbor, sent screenshots. Something's going on at 324. Anyone know why Dean was arrested? That new guy had a gun too, just saying this is why background checks matter before people move in. Terrence read every word, hands resting on the kitchen counter. Dorian sat at the table, arms crossed, chewing his thumbnail. You're going to say something to them? Dorian asked. No. Why not? They're talking like you started it. Let them talk, Terrence said quietly. They weren't outside. They didn't see what almost happened. Dorian stood restless. You should have let me say something. I had it under control. You shouldn't have had to, Terrence replied, meeting his son's eyes. You're 14, Dorian. You don't carry that responsibility. I do. The silence between them was heavy, not angry. That evening, Tanya brought cornbread and an apology. She'd lived there 12 years, avoided Dean but never spoke up. Some of these folks, she whispered, they've let him do this stuff too long. You're not the first family he's gone after, just the first one who didn't flinch. Terrence thanked her and closed the door. The next day, "Trouble" was spray painted on Terrence's trash can. Dorian saw it first, reaching for a sponge. "I'll clean it." Terrence stopped him. "Leave it. Whoever did it wants to see us react, wants us rattled. We won't give them that." It stayed for 2 more days until the city replaced the can. No one admitted it, no one apologized. But the stares continued. At the hardware store, people whispered. An older man in a camo hat muttered loudly, "Don't start, none won't be none." Terrence kept walking. Dorian started carrying a pocket knife. Terrence found it, leading to their first real fight since moving. "You're not walking around armed," Terrence stated. "I'm not trying to start anything." Dorian protested. "You're trying to survive the wrong way," Terrence's voice rose. "You think carrying a blade makes you safer? Gives you power? It doesn't. It gives them an excuse." "So what then?" Dorian snapped. "I'm just supposed to wait for the next Dean? You wait with your head up. You wait with your mind sharp. You move with discipline, not fear, not impulse. That's the difference between you walking away or not walking at all." Dorian said nothing more, but the knife went back in his drawer. The story leaked beyond the neighborhood. The ring footage, anonymous at first, spread on Facebook, then Reddit, then a local news outlet. The short clip showed Dean's clear voice, the visible gun, Terrence's calm response, Dorian's stillness. No commentary needed. Public reactions split. Some praised Terrence's restraint. Others questioned his gun ownership. Some blamed Dean. Others said he was protecting the community. But the most repeated phrase, "He pulled a gun on a kid and that kid never even raised his voice." A few days later, a letter and signed was taped to their front door. "You're not welcome here. Leave before something happens you can't fix." Terrence didn't report it. He didn't pack. He stayed. That Sunday, he and Dorian walked to the small park. Ice followed them. No one spoke. Terrence nodded to everyone, calm and firm. Dorian whispered, "You're not scared." "Son," Terrence said, "when people look at you with fear in their hearts, they'll do one of 2 things. Attack you or wait for you to mess up. I'm not giving them either." The message was clear. This was about more than one man. It was about a neighborhood choosing who belonged. By Monday, Dean Whitlock was a whispered name. The local paper, with a dry headline, "Man detained after dispute with teen in Warner Robins neighborhood," downplayed the weapon, omitted the badge, and ignored the pistol inches from Dorian's chest. Terrence wasn't surprised. But someone in the city police department took it seriously. Detective Carla Benavides called Terrence directly. "Mr. Brooks, I saw the footage. I want to meet." They met at the public library. Dorian stayed home. Benavides, tired-eyed and no-nonsense, didn't ask about his military record or try to impress him. She simply said, "You showed remarkable restraint. That man had his finger on the trigger. You didn't flinch." "I've seen worse," Terrence said. "Doesn't make it right," she nodded. They talked for an hour about the unpursued complaints against Dean, his vague connection to the former HOA president, and how Dean had fabricated his role on a non-existent security committee. "People tolerated him," Benavides said, "because it was easier than confronting the discomfort." Terrence tilted his head. "That's how men like him grow roots." She nodded. "Not anymore." Within 2 weeks, Dean was charged with brandishing a weapon, impersonating an officer, and making terroristic threats. No felonies, but enough for court dates, legal bills, and a record. The real blow: he was banned from the neighborhood he'd policed with swagger. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. Terrence didn't go, but Tanya Ramsey did. She called him afterward. They tried to smooth it over. Talked about misunderstandings. "I told them, if a kid had died, you'd be apologizing to a grieving father." A few neighbors offered quiet apologies, baked goods. One man, a schoolteacher named Leonard Price, shook Terrence's hand. "You taught this whole block a lesson without saying a damn word." Dorian started walking taller, less burdened. He joined a basketball team, shooting hoops at the park instead of circling the driveway, hiding. And the word kept spreading. A local pastor invited Terrence to speak at Sunday service. Terrence hesitated, but Dorian said, "Maybe someone else needs to hear it." So he went, stood before a packed Macedonia Baptist church, and told the story without anger, just facts. Then he said something that resonated. "Control isn't power. Restraint is. A man with a gun can take a life. But a man who holds back when he has every right to act, that's the man who shapes the future. No fireworks, no parade, just a slow turning. A few weeks later, a new HOA rule passed. Anyone impersonating security or harassing residents would be reported directly to law enforcement. No HOA approval needed. Not a revolution but a start. Terrence stood on his porch one evening, watching Dorian walk back from practice unbothered. Tanya called from her yard, "Your boy's got some speed." Terrence smirked. "He gets it from his mom." Dorian laughed. Even with Dean gone and policies changed, Terrence knew this wasn't the end. It was just the first time someone made the neighborhood truly look at itself. The calls slowed, the stares faded, the garbage can remained undefaced, and the neighborhood chat, once buzzing with chaos, quieted into birthday announcements. Life, it seemed, had moved on. But Terrence Brooks hadn't. You don't forget the image of your son standing still while a stranger decides whether or not to squeeze a trigger. He'd seen worse overseas, bombs kicked indoors, split-second decisions. But nothing hit like that afternoon on his own street. One evening, Dorian came into the living room with a permission slip. "They want me to give a talk," he said, "at school. About the incident." Terrence looked up. "What for?" "They're doing some anti-bullying community awareness thing. Mrs. Carver said my story might help." Terrence thought for a moment. "You want to do it?" Dorian shrugged. "I'm not scared of talking, just don't know what to say." "Say what you know," Terrence said. "Not what they expect to hear." Dorian stared at the paper, then nodded. 2 weeks later, Terrence sat in the back of the school gym. Dorian stood under fluorescent lights before 200 students. No microphone, just his voice. "He pulled a gun on me," Dorian said plainly. "He said I didn't belong. But I was on my own street. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there. My dad stepped in before it got worse." He paused, scanning the crowd. Some kids leaned forward. Teachers wiped eyes. "I think a lot of us get looked at like we don't belong. Not just me. Maybe because of how we dress, where we come from, how we speak. But we do. We belong in our homes, in our schools, on our sidewalks." The sentence hung in the air. Afterward, kids shook his hand, asked questions, some stood quietly unsure, but they felt it. Terrence waited until they were in the car. "You handled yourself like a man today." Dorian smiled faintly. "Didn't feel like one that day." "Real strength isn't about how you feel in the moment," Terrence said. "It's about what you choose not to do, even when everything inside you says swing." That night, Terrence sat at his desk, a legal pad before him. He wrote principles he used to teach recruits. Calm under fire, eyes on the exit, never assume the room is safe. He crossed out the jargon, rewrote them for Dorian, then stuck the list to the fridge. Soon after, the city council invited him to speak, updating community engagement policies. Terrence, in a button-down and jeans, brought no statistics, no slides, just his presence. When his turn came, he stepped to the mic. "I don't need to be protected from my own son. I need to know he won't be treated like a threat before he even speaks." A few heads nodded, a few didn't move. It didn't matter. Some people think safety means making everyone who looks different feel watched. That's not safety, that's fear with a badge. After the meeting, a council member approached him. "You changed a lot of minds tonight." Terrence simply said, "Let's hope they stay changed when the next kid is standing on the sidewalk." At home, Dorian was stretched on the couch, shoes off, watching a kung fu movie volume high. Terrence stood in the doorway, arms crossed, quiet. Dorian looked over. "What?" "Nothing," Terrence said. "You're all right. Want me to turn it down?" "No, leave it." He walked to the kitchen, grabbed a beer and sat at the table. For the first time in weeks, his hands didn't feel tight. Outside, the porch light flickered on with motion, a squirrel, a breeze. Nothing urgent, nothing threatening. Just light doing its job. But even with the peace settling, Terrence knew it came at a cost. One they'd both carry in ways the neighborhood would never fully see. It had been almost 3 months since Dean Whitlock stood on the curb, handcuffed and silent. Terrence and Dorian had settled into something close to normal. The lawn was always cut, trash bins out like clockwork. Neighbors waved more now, some from courtesy, some from guilt. Dorian had grown taller, his voice deeper, surer. His bearing had changed too. Still smiling, still joking, but with a new awareness beneath it. Terrence watched silently. Brief, quiet moments when Dorian would stare too long out the front window, or pause before stepping off the porch. It passed quickly, but Terence saw the imprint, the kind people carry even when the wound isn't bleeding. One Saturday in the garage, Dorian held up one of Terence's old field packs. "You used to carry this every day?" Terence nodded. "When I had to. It's heavy. It was supposed to be." Dorian slung it over his shoulders, wobbling. "I couldn't run a mile in this." "You don't need to," Terence said. "You're not fighting my wars." "But sometimes it feels like I'm still in one," Dorian muttered almost to himself. Terence paused, then looked him square in the eyes. "You are. It's just a different kind." Later that afternoon on the porch, both drinking lemonade under a bruised sky, an older couple walking their dog waved. Terence waved back. Dorian nodded. Then Dorian asked, "Do you think Dean ever really thought I was a threat?" Terence didn't answer right away. "I think Dean didn't care what was true. He cared about what made him feel in control. You were standing in the way of that. That's all it took." Dorian sat back, legs stretched. "And he still didn't say sorry." "People like that rarely do," Terence said. "So why didn't you do more?" Dorian asked. "Like really go after him?" Terence turned to him. "Because justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about exposure. Dean's gone. His lies are public. People know what he did. And you're still here." Dorian thought about that. "Feels like a small win." "It always starts small," Terence said. "Then it grows." That evening, Terence typed on his phone a post for a neighborhood forum he'd never used. To those who watched and said nothing, silence isn't neutral. To those who stood up after it happened, thank you. To the ones still unsure where they stand, ask yourself what you'd do if it had been your child on that sidewalk. He didn't send it. Instead, he called Dorian into the kitchen and read it aloud. Dorian smiled. "That's good. I think," Terence said, "I'll let the living speak louder than the words." Dorian nodded. "That's what you've been doing." There was no perfect ending, no big ceremony, no viral redemption arc. But the porch stayed quiet. Dorian went to school each morning without checking both sides of the street. He stopped glancing at the Ring notifications. He slept deeper, laughed louder. And Terence moved his pistol back to the bedroom safe where it belonged. Not because he didn't believe it might be needed again, but because for the first time in a long time he believed perhaps it wouldn't. In the end, they had claimed more than a house, more than a patch of land. They'd claimed space, dignity, the right to exist without fear. And that, Terence thought, was worth more than any headline or court ruling. Because the real victory isn't surviving the fire. It's staying human through it. If this story meant something to you, share it. Let others hear it. Let the silence break. And if you're not already subscribed, stick around. These stories matter.